All right, welcome back to Critical Wave Theory, or what we might call Mind in Motion in this episode. Anyway, we're going to explore how ideas shape the world and how the world shapes ideas. So today I'm talking about something that's both ancient and ever present: cultural evolution, how societies change, grow, and pass their values from one generation to the next. So I'll break it down into four phases: mutation, selection, diffusion, and stabilization, and see how every innovation from the wheel to the written word fits somewhere in this cycle. So, phase one, mutation. And that's an easy place to start because, well, the word mutation is fun. The very premise of mutation or mutants is fun. So in biology, mutations are small changes that sometimes lead to big evolutionary leaps. In culture, it's pretty similar. Individuals or groups come up with new ideas, tools, or ways of thinking that break from tradition. Think of the first time someone shaped a round stone into a wheel, or turnette, as early versions were called. And from what I can recall, turnettes were usually done for pottery purposes, for making pottery. So the wheel originally was not just a travel thing, it was for a different purpose. And that simple act changed everything. It revolutionized trade, eventually travel, and even more eventually the structure of human society. As the idea caught on, the technology caught on, it really did have a tremendous impact. That's why all this time later, there could be a solid argument that the invention of the wheel was really one of the biggest human inventions. I know some people will say, "Oh, it's the internet," but I mean, sometimes you got to kick it old school, and you got to look at the wheel, or also, food-based technology or methods that were also hugely impactful. These cultural mutations can come from necessity, curiosity, or a hunger for change. They challenge what's considered normal and open the door to new possibilities. Of course, not every idea sticks. That's where the next phase comes in. So, phase two is selection. Once a new idea appears, it enters the next phase of selection, the social version of natural selection. Some ideas catch on, others fade away. In biology, we call it artificial selection when humans intentionally breed traits they find useful, like domesticating animals or cultivating crops. You can sometimes create new crops, and you can feel like a mad scientist even if you do that. In cultures, something similar happens in general. Societies select ideas that fit their values, needs, or aesthetic preferences. Take writing systems, for example. They weren't instantly universal, they had to prove their worth. Once people saw how writing improved communication and record keeping, the idea spread quickly. It had clear advantages, so it was selected and passed along. Obviously, this isn't all done through an actual organized committee of people saying, "Oh, I like that idea. Let's make sure it is passed along down the ages." I mean, sometimes people can approximate something like that, but really, it's most often more of a natural sort of thing. It's not it's not always something that's decided in the most intentional ways. It just becomes sort of a force of habit. This is the heart of cultural evolutionary theory, the idea that cultures adapt and change based on what works best for their people and environment. So, what about phase three? That is diffusion. Now that an idea has been selected, it starts to spread. This is diffusion. Anthropologists call it the diffusion of innovations. It's how ideas travel through migration, trade, storytelling, or, yes, as much as I don't like to say it or admit it, even conquest. One powerful example is the diffusion of agriculture from the Fertile Crescent into Europe and Asia. And I'm not exactly a walking encyclopedia of knowledge, so if you were to ask me about the specifics of the Fertile Crescent, like all of the dimensions, all that is known of that history, I'd probably draw a blank, to be honest. But I am aware of the Fertile Crescent. I've heard of it, and it's an important part of how agriculture developed in human history. As people moved and interacted, they carried their crops, their tools, and techniques with them. These new societies adopted and adapted these practices, changing their own food systems and social structures in the process. Diffusion is also where cultures start to blend and diversify. As ideas move, they don't stay static, they mutate again, restart the cycle, and enrich the global cultural landscape. Well, I mean, I guess some ideas, they get rejected because they don't enrich the global cultural landscape. But I'll largely put that general topic aside because that's not exactly what we're talking about here. But it is sort of an important thing to note. I often say you got to take the good with the bad, but also if you want to be accurate, you sometimes have to take the bad with the good. You have to give a bad example to emphasize that it's not a perfect process. Of course, human beings create stumbling blocks, they set up hurdles, they do all sorts of things that actually stifle cultural innovation. And in an age where multiculturalism is so often pathetically attacked, it becomes more important than ever to describe how deeply interconnected cultural exchanges can be, and to really emphasize that some of the great things that we have happen through cultural exchange. That's a fact of life now. And that's why it's so absurd to have movements that are starkly in the other direction. So phase 4 is stabilization, which is kind of relevant to what I was just talking about. It's I don't know if there's a final phase. It's not an exact science, this kind of stuff. These are just ways to generalize about things. If you were really to look at how things happen in human society, I mean, not only would you be having your narrative challenged and seeing that things are more complicated, things are not always so neat and clean to describe. But in some ways, you might even be, slightly horrified by some of the weird realities of how daily life happens. But anyway, when it comes to stabilization, which is the phase 4, it's the point where an idea becomes part of a society's DNA, so to speak. It's no longer new, it's tradition. Maybe people believe that they simply could not even survive without that idea, which is, a little bit odd because in a lot of cases, maybe even most cases, societies didn't even have that idea previously, right? But we've just become so used to it that it's really just how we view the world. We view things through that particular framework. Like an example might be the internet that I mentioned earlier. Like I barely remember life before the internet, even though of course I've spent days away from a computer and all that sort of thing. But pre-internet, it gets a little bit fuzzy when you think about it. So that's actually a pretty solid example of what we're talking about with stabilization, because it's hard to even imagine, like, if there's a power outage and your computers on the fritz or something like that, you know, if you're an internet addict or a video game addict, where do you go from that point? What do you do when you no longer have that thing? I just saw, I mean, this is strange, but I just saw a YouTube video of gamers in a place that is impacted by a monsoon standing in the floodwaters while they're playing their video games. That's how addicted they are to video games. And, obviously you can make fun of that sort of thing and see it as sad and scary and pathetic or any number of things. But you almost have to be impressed by it too. Like that's a hardcore addiction right there. That's somebody who's largely defined a part of their life around playing video games, and it's sort of a physical need at that point. So that's sort of an obvious example of what we're talking about when it comes to stabilization. It can sometimes even look like an outright addiction. So at this stage, the innovation is passed down through generations, woven into customs, rituals, and institutions. It's what creates cultural continuity, the preservation of knowledge and values over time. So think of religious teachings like love thy neighbor. At some point, that was a new moral idea. Well, the religion was new. I don't think the basic idea of at least tolerating your neighbor, I don't think that was totally new. But over centuries, that particular value of that religion became a foundation of societies, a stabilizing force shaping laws, ethics, and daily behavior. Now, of course, I'm not saying that religious people do always love their neighbor. Of course, they don't. In fact, religious people can actually be some of the worst neighbors. Um, but the point is, when you have a religious teaching that sort of catches on like a wildfire, I think it becomes hard to shake the idea off. When it comes to like holiday traditions as well. Obviously, we're entering the holiday season as I'm recording this, being shortly after Christmas. Thanksgiving is on its way, or not Christmas. I meant Halloween. It's shortly after Halloween, so Thanksgiving is on its way, and then of course Christmas and New Year's Day, and even Valentine's Day is probably not considered as important of a tradition for our society, but definitely it's got some staying power. So when it comes to any sort of uh, family get together that's traditional, a lot of people still see merit in that over time. The idea of having a Thanksgiving feast with your family and putting your differences aside at least for one day, I think that has appeal. It's a sign that hey, we still have some semblance of a family that we can take a little bit of pride in or whatever. And at the very least, you might have some delicious food. There might even be some arguing at the table or what have you, but at the end of the day, there's some real value there for a lot of people. And I know Thanksgiving is sometimes politicized, people have some mixed feelings about it, but for me, it's always just been a day for the family to get together and have a feast. You know, it doesn't have to be more complicated than that. And of course, even stability isn't permanent, as Cavalli Sforza, one of the great thinkers in this field, argues. These phases aren't linear, they're cyclical. Cultural parents pass ideas to the next generation, but each generation reshapes them, mutating, selecting, and diffusing them again. So that's why things mutate over time, and some traditions actually do die out, even some of the ones that people no doubt thought would be permanent. So next time you see a new trend, a technology, or social movement, from viral dances to renewable energy, think of it as part of this evolutionary cycle. First, someone mutates an idea, then society selects it, it spreads it through diffusion, And if it lasts, then it stabilizes into something that future generations might take for granted. Culture, in the end, is alive. It's a conversation across centuries between what we've inherited and what we're daring enough to change. So, hopefully, you found this episode interesting. Thanks for listening. And if you enjoyed today's episode, subscribe and leave a review. Click the like button. Whatever sort of positive critiques you can make. Again, I don't want somebody just saying, "Oh, your voice sucks." Like, I don't like the way your voice sounds. Like, oh, okay, I probably can't do that much to change it unless you want me to talk with a like a weird voice that's not my own. But if you've got constructive criticism, you know, go for it. Let me know about that. And it really helps with helping more curious minds find the show. And until next time, stay open, stay curious, and keep evolving.